Now come to the final essay in The Will to Believe and Other Essays in Popular Philosophy by my homeboy William James, What Psychical Research Has Accomplished. The great field for new discoveries, said a scientific friend to me the other day, is always the unclassified residuum. Round about the accredited and orderly facts of every science there ever floats a sort of dust cloud of exceptional observations, of occurrences minute and irregular and seldom met with, which it always proves more easy to ignore than to attend to. The ideal of every science is that of a closed and completed system of truth. The charm of most sciences to their more passive disciples consists in their appearing, in fact, to wear just this ideal form, etc., etc. Phenomena unclassifiable within the system are therefore paradoxical absurdities and must be held untrue, etc., etc. When, moreover, as so often happens, the reports, no, etc., yeah, let's keep going with just that section, must be held untrue. When, moreover, as so often happens, the reports of them are vague and indirect, when they come as mere marvels and oddities rather than as things of serious moment, one neglects or denies them with the best of scientific consciences. Only the born geniuses let themselves be worried and fascinated by these outstanding exceptions, and get no peace till they are brought within the fold. Your Galileos, Galvanis, Fresnels, Perkinges, and Darwins are always getting confounded and troubled by insignificant things. Anyone will renovate a science who will steadily look after the irregular phenomena. And when the science is renewed, its new formulas often have more of the voice of the exceptions in them than of what were supposed to be the rules. James is a freaking empiricist. James does not want to take anything in human experience and say, we're not going to consider that because it doesn't fit within our theory. Not even theory informed by experience, like scientific theories. Not skipping any. Same bit. No part of the unclassified residuum has usually been treated with the more contemptuous scientific disregard than the mass of phenomena generally called mystical. Etc., etc. To no one type of mind is it given to discern the totality of truth. Something escapes the best of us. Not accidentally, but systematically, and because we have a twist. The scientific academic mind and the feminine mystical mind shy from each other's facts, just as they fly from each other's temper and spirit. Facts are there only for those who have a mental affinity with them. No one can know the whole truth. And it turns out it's not just because our minds are finite, but, every mind finds it more or less impossible to recognize certain kinds of truths. We just don't have the knack for it. We recognize other kinds of truths, and those who have trouble recognizing those normally have a knack for recognizing those we can't get to. But once they are disputably ascertained and admitted, the academic and critical minds are by far the best fitted ones to interpret and discuss them. But on the other hand, if there is anything which human history demonstrates, it is the extreme slowness with which the ordinary academic and critical mind acknowledges facts to exist, which present themselves as wild facts. So, there's a lot of testimony from human experience that, I guess these days we'd say paranormal phenomena are real things. But more specifically, I guess we don't have to be that specific, but let's stick with James' language, because it's probably better. Certainly for understanding James. The massive phenomena generally termed mystical. There's a ton of testimony from human experience to mystical phenomena. And James is an empiricist, and he's not going to say that any particular kind of testimony from experience is ruled out of consideration because it doesn't fit our theories, not even if our theories are pretty well informed by other experiences. Now you have to take the whole of human experience and fit your theories to experience, not the other way around. Now, does that mean that we just take the reports of mystical phenomena at their word? Do we say, well, so-and-so said he saw a ghost, therefore ghosts exist? No. You have to look carefully at experience and interpret it carefully. In fact, science wouldn't exist if we took simple physical appearances and just wrote them down. You have to classify them, and look beyond the appearances at the facts behind them. The appearances can be deceiving, even in physical sciences. So you have to look very carefully at this psychical phenomena, at psychical phenomena, mystical phenomena, paranormal stuff, mystical to stick closer to James' language. You have to look at it carefully, but you ought to be willing to look at it. And James dreams of a more informed empirical system of thought, science, in fact, if I understand him correctly, that has accounted for these things. And he'd like us to get on with it. We are not by any means carelessly, uncritically accepting just anything people say. I saw a ghost, or I experienced this weird thing. We're not accepting all of these things. What we are doing is accepting testimony of experience as things to be examined so that we can try to figure out what's really happening in the world, much as we do with science. So James wants to take a look at research into psychic phenomena and see if we can learn anything from it, very tentatively, very provisionally. Wherever debate between the mystics and the scientifics has been once for all decided, it is the mystics who have usually proved to be right about the facts, while the scientifics had the better of it in respect to the theories. Oh, that's a fun remark. Let's just leave it as is. He who will pay attention to facts of the sort dear to mystics while reflecting upon them in academic, scientific ways will be in the best possible position to help philosophy. Oh my goodness, that was great. We better do that again. The writer of these pages, James himself, has been forced in the past few years to this admission. Rewind. Repugnant as the mystical side of philosophizing may be, especially when self-complacent, there is no sort of doubt that it goes with the gift for meeting with certain kinds of phenomenal experience. The writer of these pages has been forced in the past few years to this admission, and he now believes that he who will pay attention to facts of the sort dear to mystics, while reflecting upon them in academic, scientific ways, will be in the best possible position to help philosophy. If you can look at reports of mystical experience and examine them scientifically, maybe I misspoke, you will be doing a great service to philosophy. So maybe James is not dreaming of a better science. He's dreaming of a critical thinking of the sort science does. That is to say, the rational thinking, the rational, cautious, empirical thinking that science does, applied to psychic research to produce maybe not a better science, but a better philosophy. And refers to the Society for Psychical Research that has been trying to do this. And he talks about all of that. And he talks about other stuff. And I think I'm just going to see if I can skip to his tentative conclusion about what psychical research examines scientifically, what scientific examination of mystical, specifically psychic phenomena, or allegedly psychic phenomena, has achieved. What tentative conclusion can we draw from this? Ghost stories. Here's a philosopher who talks about ghost stories. I'm going to have to find, if I can, the right passage in which he presents his conclusion. I must close my gossip about the proceedings of the Society for Psychical Research, my gossip about the proceedings by naming what, after all, seems to me the most important part of its contents. It's the Society for Psychical Research. This is the long series of articles by Mr. Myers, what he now calls the subliminal self, or what one might designate as ultra-marginal consciousness. The result of Mr. Myers' learned and ingenious studies in hypnotism, hallucination, etc., is a conviction which he expresses in the following terms. Now James is quoting this Myers character. Each of us is in reality an abiding psychical entity far more extensive than he knows. An individuality which can never express itself completely through any corporeal manifestation. The self manifests itself through the organism, but there is always some part of the self unmanifested, and always, as it seems, some power of organic expression in abeyance or reserve. The ordinary consciousness Mr. Myers likens to the visible part of the solar spectrum. The total consciousness is like the spectrum prolonged by the inclusion of the ultra-red and ultraviolet rays. In the psychic spectrum, the ultra parts may embrace a far wider range both of physiological and of psychical activity than is open to our ordinary consciousness and memory. So, let's not comment on it just yet. James, referring to some of his personal collection of information about reports of psychical phenomena, in cases of hallucination in healthy persons specifically. It says, the result is to make me feel that we all have potentially a subliminal self, which may make it anytime eruption IRRUPTION into our ordinary lives. At its lowest, it is only the depository of our forgotten memories. At its highest, we do not know what it is at all. So what has psychical research accomplished? Applying a scientific approach to paranormal, specifically mystical, and paranormal, rather let's say mystical to stick to James' language, and to be a little more specific, psychical. What has a scientific research into psychic kind of phenomena shown? Well, not that ghosts exist. He didn't come to that conclusion, if that's what you wanted. What it's shown is that there is more to the human consciousness than we are normally aware of. There are huge regions of consciousness, huge regions of the self that we're not usually consciously conscious of. At one end, it's just the memories we've forgotten. But maybe it's a whole lot more at a higher end. Now, that's it. I think that's his only conclusion. He's not going to say ghosts exist, etc. We have to do more research. Now, you want to know where he might go with this. What sort of higher being? Are we all just little pieces of some god, perhaps? Is there some, I don't know, is there some connection to some spiritual being, some angel or something, that the human consciousness, where we're not conscious of it, connects? Those are just suggestions that come to my mind. Ways you might interpret this. James doesn't seem interested in interpreting it at all, because, again, he's just trying to approach it scientifically and draw the conclusions justified by the evidence. But you want to know where he goes with this later? With this idea, this insight that if psychical research has not proven that ghosts exist and so on, at least it has shown that human consciousness has more to it than we're normally consciously aware of. Maybe I should say the human mind has more to it than its present consciousness is aware of. That's the conclusion from psychical research studied scientifically. Where's he going to go with this? What's he going to suggest is the significance of this? Is there any sort of account? Is James going to stick with this this estimation that at the highest point of the human mind, the subliminal self, the human mind we're not consciously aware of, at its highest we do not know what it is at all? Is he going to still say we don't know what it is at all? He's going to stick with that. This is his early writings. Well, if you want to know where he goes with this, you want to take this thread, this insight that there's more to the human mind than we're presently consciously aware of, and see where he picks it up in the varieties of religious experience, and again in a pluralistic universe. That's where you want to go next, if we're going to be thorough with this. Let's see if we can close our commentary on The Will to Believe and Other Essays in Popular Philosophy with some of these remarks towards the end. Although in its essence science only stands for a method and for no fixed belief, yet as habitually taken, it is identified with a certain fixed belief, the belief that the hidden order of nature is mechanical exclusively, that non-mechanical categories are irrational ways of conceiving and explaining even such things as human life. Science technically is a method, not a particular fixed conclusion, but a lot of fans and foes of science equate science, somewhat carelessly, with the idea of materialism, the idea that all is matter, even humans and human life. Now, this mechanical rationalism, as one may call it, makes, if it becomes one's only way of thinking, a violent breach with the ways of thinking that have played the greatest part in human history. This materialistic approach doesn't seem to fit very well with the ways of thinking that have played the greatest part in human history. Religious thinking, ethical thinking, poetical thinking, teleological, emotional, sentimental thinking, what one might call the personal view of life to distinguish it from the impersonal and mechanical, and the romantic view of life to distinguish it from the rationalistic view have been, and even still are, outside of well-drilled scientific circles, the dominant forms of thought. But for mechanical rationalism, personality is an insubstantial illusion. All the interest of religion, ethics, poetry, teleology, emotion, and sentiment are difficult to explain, if not just obviously incompatible with, or obviously distinct from, mechanism, the operation of chunks of matter according to a couple of laws of physics. That's not the same thing as poetry, religious thinking, ethical thinking, poetical thinking, theological, emotional, sentimental thinking, or getting at some aspect of human experience that's not captured by chunks of matter operating according to a few laws of physics. Our debt to science is literally boundless, etc. But the Society for Psychical Research's proceedings have, it seems to me, conclusively proved one thing to the candid reader, and that is that the verdict of pure insanity, fortuitous preference for error, superstition without an excuse, which the scientists of our day are led by their intellectual training to pronounce upon the entire thought of the past, is a most shallow verdict. This parallels magnificently C.S. Lewis' critique of what he calls chronological snobbery, the idea that we are more recent, and if you're going to go into a little more detail, now we have science, and therefore all these people in the past are all confused, silly simpletons. If only they had our science, they would have been rational like we are. James says, this is a most shallow verdict. The personal and romantic view of life has other roots beside wanton exuberance of imagination and perversity of heart. It is perennially led by facts of experience, whatever the ulterior interpretation of those facts may prove to be. You want to be careful with your interpretation of the facts of experience. Facts of mystical experience, facts of religious experience, facts of moral experience, poetical thinking, teleological, emotional, sentimental thinking, the personal view of life, the religious view of life, etc., etc. These are responses to experience, and you want to be careful. And now I'm reminded of something he said way back in the preface. I don't know if I can just find it and read it, but if memory serves, he says something along the lines of this. He says, I'm writing this book, or I did these essays for intellectuals, for people trained in science. If I were writing these things for ordinary people far away from the university, for maybe uneducated or less rationalistic people far away from the university, think of the most irrational person at church, or the most irrational person who might go to a seance or something, or all those irrational people on the internet. If he was writing for them, he might have told them, calm down, slow down with your conclusions, try some science for a change, draw your conclusions more carefully. But James is writing this book largely for the intellectuals, reminding the intellectuals that they don't have particularly good reasons for discounting this whole other side of human experience, reminding them that this whole other side of theories of life, of the meaning of life, and of the nature of the universe, this personal view of life, all these descriptions of the universe after a moral point of view, making room for a God who's on our side, or on whose side we should be in the moral struggle that he's talked about throughout this book. All of this stuff is itself a response to experience, and science hasn't found any particular evidence against it. We have to be careful with Hegelian monism and the materialistic mechanical monism, and be careful with jumping ahead, leaping ahead of the facts, and drawing conclusions not well justified by them. In response to this personal, non-materialistic side of human experience. So if you want to see where James goes in the future, if you want to see what he does with the personal side of human experience, what further conclusions he tries to draw, you need to look at the varieties of religious experience. At this point in time, I'm exhausted by William James. I have no intentions of doing a video on the varieties of religious experience. It's a wonderful book. It's a large book. You might want to read the first few chapters, any couple of random chapters in the middle, and the last couple of chapters, and try to get a feel for his developed picture of these things. And A Pluralistic Universe, where he gives a nicely developed picture in a much shorter book of radical empiricism. Here he's just getting started. And if you want a short summary, I can give it to you, but I'm not sure I'm going to give it in this video. I've already typed it. It's published. It's in my article on William James and Allama Iqbal. You should be able to find some information about it on the internet, and you may find the few pages in that article where I summarize radical empiricism, drawing from this book, then drawing from the varieties, and drawing from a pluralistic universe, to be a much more succinct and helpful introduction to what William James is doing here and where he goes with it in his later writings. And one final piece of advice, and I'll finally shut up. Don't let me do your thinking for you. Don't let me do your reading for you. Not all of it, anyway. Read some of the great books in the history of philosophy, or find some significant portions of books that can be nicely divided into bits, and read, for example, a few essays from The Will to Believe and other essays in popular philosophy by my homeboy William James.